I have two favorite things about summer. One is fruit and two is fruit pies. Now up here in Washington, one of the best fruits we have is the cherry. But these cherries, the kind that you usually get at the supermarket that you eat, are actually not very good in pies, but sour cherries are. One of the farmers at the farmer's market sells sour cherries once per year, and I woke up extra early yesterday so I could be sure to get sour cherries so I could make this sour cherry pie, and now I'm gonna share it all with you.
These are sour cherries. With their golden pink color, they may look like Rainier cherries to you, but these sour cherries are very different. They're smaller, and most noticeably, they're sour. I've tried them raw before, and believe me, they are quite sour and not very pleasant to eat, but they make wonderful pie. And here are some Bing cherries for comparison. Now, you can make this pie with Bings, since sour cherries are incredibly hard to come by, but your pie will taste very different. Good, but different. You'll also want to use much less sugar in the filling, and I'll note this in the written recipe in the video description below. So the first thing you want to do is make a pie dough. Here I'm combining a scant 2 cups of all-purpose flour with a teaspoon of salt and 1½ sticks of cold butter cut into tiny pieces. I'm using a pastry cutter here to help break up the butter into smaller pieces. And once the butter is broken down a little, I get in there with my hands to smash the butter pieces and break them up even smaller. You don't want to work the dough too much though. Some bigger butter pieces are going to give your crust a nice flaky texture. Next, I'm spooning in about 6 tablespoons of ice water. Once the dough starts to come together, I turn it out onto my countertop to finish clumping it into a ball of dough. It's really important to work the dough as little as possible once you add the water because you don't want to cause gluten to develop. This will make your crust really tough. And your dough should be a little shaggy, but if it's too dry, you can add a little more water as I'm doing here. Press it into a ball, wrap it in plastic wrap, and put it in the fridge for a ½ hour so the flour can finish hydrating and the dough can rest and get nice and cold. I like to pound it flat with a rolling pin to help the dough come together and make it easier to roll out later. While the pie dough is chilling, it's time to process those cherries. You'll have to remove the pits, and the easiest way of doing this is by gently pulling them out along with the stem. If you squeeze on a cherry a little and wiggle the stem as you pull on it, you can usually get the pit to come out with the stem. I'm really sorry that my camera refused to focus while I was doing this part, but hopefully you get the idea. If the pit doesn't come out along with the stem, the best way to get it out is to squeeze on the cherry and pop it out. It's fine if the cherry breaks in the process. You want 5 cups of cherries total for this pie, and luckily I had exactly that. Once your cherries are pitted and washed, it's time to turn them into pie filling. I've put them back in the same bowl I used to mix the pastry. And if you're wondering why it's glass instead of a red Tupperware bowl like earlier, it's because I recycled footage of myself making pastry from the turkey pot pie video I did a few months ago. So go check that out if you want to make a savory pie later. I'm adding 1¼ cups of sugar, and it would be 3/4 of a cup of sugar if these were Bing cherries. Then I add 1 tablespoon of lemon juice, and I like to mix it at this point so the sugar can penetrate the cherries. Then I add 1/4 cup of cornstarch. This is really important as it will thicken the pie filling. It's also traditional to add 1/4 teaspoon of almond extract, but I hate almond extract. It just does not taste at all like almonds to me, so I skipped that and mixed in the cornstarch. I like to use a spatula to do my mixing so I can do a better job at scraping the bowl clean into the pie shell later. Then I add 3 tablespoons of butter cut into little pieces. You're technically supposed to add this in after you've poured the filling into the shell, but I sometimes forget to add it at that stage, so I like to put it in now for insurance. Now, the recipe I used from The Joy of Cooking also said add 2 tablespoons of water to the filling. I was skeptical about this, so I was going to leave it out, but at the last minute I decided to add it anyway, and that was a bad move. As I'd suspected, the filling wound up being a little too watery, so don't add water. Set the cherry filling aside to rest for 15 minutes, and at this point I like to preheat the oven to 450 degrees Fahrenheit and position the racks towards the bottom of the oven. That entire process of making the cherry filling should take about a ½ hour, which means the pie dough is now ready to roll out. Divide the dough into 2 halves. I like to make one of the halves bigger than the other, and this one will be the bottom crust. Roll them out as best you can. You can always patch things up later if it's craggy or messed up. Then transfer the bigger sheet of pie dough into the pie tin. Make sure there's at least 1 inch of dough hanging over the edge of the pie tin. If your kitchen is hot, you might want to put the pie shell into the fridge while you roll out the top crust. For the top crust, I'm going to do a woven lattice, so what you need to do is roll out the dough as you normally would, but then cut it into 1-inch strips. I like to do 10 strips total, and you can use a ruler and be super precise, but I always just eyeball it. It should take about 15 minutes to roll out and prepare the pie crusts, which means the cherry pie filling is now ready. See how organized everything is. I love being efficient in the kitchen. Dump the filling into the bottom crust and spread it out evenly. This is the part where you're supposed to add in the butter, but like I said earlier, sometimes I forget to add it, which is why I like to put it in earlier. As I mentioned earlier, I'm doing a woven lattice top, and it looks impressive, but it's actually quite easy to do. First, place 5 of the strips of dough vertically across the top of the pie. I like to press them to the edges of the pie crust on the top side to secure them. Then I fold strips numbers 1, 3, and 5 up and put a horizontal strip down. Then I return strips 1, 3, and 5 down. Then I lift strips 2 and 4. Then I put down a second horizontal strip. Then I return strips 2 and 4 down. I think you see where this is going. Repeat this 3 more times until all 10 strips of dough are woven. Once all the strips are down, I trim up the edges of the pie with a knife so there's uniformly about 1 to 2 inches of dough hanging over the edge. Once it's trimmed, I tuck the edges of the crust under. There are more decorative things you can do, but I'm not very good at it, so I just tuck. It does the trick and it looks nice and homemade. As for the dough scraps that I cut off, I like to bundle them together, wrap them in the old plastic wrap that I used for the pie dough earlier, and either freeze them for later or make a couple turnovers or mini galettes out of them the next day. Before the pie goes into the oven, brush it with a beaten egg and sprinkle it with sugar. This will give it a nice, crisp, shiny finish. Then put the pie into a 450-degree oven. I like to position the bottommost rack as low as possible with a cookie sheet on it to catch any pie drippings, and the pie on a rack directly on top of the bottommost rack. This will ensure that your pie does not have a soggy bottom. Bake at 450 for 15 minutes, then reduce the oven temperature to 350 and bake for an additional 50 to 60 minutes or until the pie crust is golden brown and the filling is thickly bubbling out of the lattice top. And behold its bubbly, cherryful goodness. And now the hardest part, waiting for it to cool. I know, warm pie is delicious, especially with vanilla ice cream, but the juices will ooze everywhere and it will be a big soggy mess when you slice into it instead of this pretty little piece I have here. Your patience will be rewarded.
And here's the delightful cherry pie. I already had a slice last night and it was delicious, but I'll just eat some more because that's the wonderful thing about making a pie when you just have a husband and no one else living with you. Pie leftovers. So just a word of caution, if you're like me and you don't like cherry flavored things because they remind you of medicine, this flavor here of these sour cherries in this context, it is actually kind of similar to artificial cherry flavor, weird though that sounds. However, I hate cherry flavored things and I really like this, so maybe if you want to try to get over your aversion towards cherry flavored things, if you can get your hands on fresh sour cherries, they're extremely hard to come by all means do that and make this pie. Otherwise, you can get them canned sometimes, and I'm sure you could probably get them canned online.
So that pie was really yummy, and I hope you all get a chance to make a sour cherry pie sometime. Special thanks to Chrissy, Britt, Honey Badgers, Megan M, Matthew, Jenny D, Robert Z, Meru, Jocelyn, Manila, Gina F, Megan B, Data Fox, Stacy, Gina S, Ruth, Katie, Lonesome Screams, Mahir, Veda, Morgan, Viet Fafo, Britta, Slowek, Colette, Maddie, and Sandra.